Hello and welcome to the Jay Duke Show Season 2. We're here in 2021 and ready to get at it again. Took a little break over the holidays and recharged the batteries, and we've got a fantastic lineup set up for you for Season 2. We have amazing riders coming on the show. We have amazing topics. And today we're going to continue with our Roundtable episodes. And it's really a special one. And this one really touches the heart. We're talking about, the role of amateurs and how amateurs are in the sport and what we can do to make it a better sport for everyone out there. We're going to be talking about the 95% number that a friend of the program, Ann Glavin, brought up. And this is a very important topic and one that affects everybody because, the grassroots and the amateurs of the sport are the bloodline that make it all happen. And, from a financial standpoint and it's really, it's a voice that needs to be heard, and that's what we're here for today. I want to thank Horse Network. I want to thank Carly Sparks for having me on for another season, and very, very excited for what we're doing this year. And so thank you to Carly, and thank you to the EquiVault.com for sponsoring today's show. The EquiVault.com has over 400 online lessons that you really need to check out. It gives you a map of your arena, gives you all the measurements and where to put the cavalettis, put the jumps. There's everything from a clay finals preparation to, beginners working through cones and poles to, preparing for a Grand Prix to everything you could ever imagine is on the EquiVault.com, and special guest lessons from people like Luciana Denise and BZ Madden and McLean Ward and people like that. So check them out, and we want to thank EquiVault.com for being along with us. So I'm going to bring on my panel today, and it's really an interesting panel. We spent a little time working on this, and all three of my guests today are all, social media influencers. They've all written some great articles. They all have great followings, and they all have some very interesting things to say. And I'm really excited to see what they have for us today on our amateur roundtable. So we have Penelope Ayres is coming on. She's a member of several boards with the USHJ, and she's going to talk about that and how she was applying to be, the amateur voice in the USHJ, and then that was derailed from her a little bit, and that was a big topic. And so we want to thank Penelope for being here. We have Brian Wee is here from Next Level Horse Business, and Brian's very influential on social media and has some great thoughts and ideas. And so I'm really excited that he's joining us today. And then we have blogger for the Chronicle of the Horse, Jen Baas, is joining us from Colorado, my old state, and love to see that. And Jen has written some fantastic stuff, including the rebuttal to Katie Prudhomme's article from a few years ago, and that kind of put her on the map, and she's continued with some excellent work, so you can check her stuff out at the Chronicle of the Horse blog forums. So guys, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here. And I want to start off with discussing the disconnect that seems to be apparent between the amateurs and kind of, I don't want to call them, the people that go to a few horse shows a year, not kind of the top of the sport, but the ones that, love horses, and they're with their horse 360 days a year, and then they do everything they can for them. Maybe they get to go to 1 or 2 horse shows a year. And what it's like for those people, and going to the horse shows and what it's like for them dealing with the fees from USCF and the fees from USHJ, which seems to be a big topic. And, are those fees necessary? And are those people's needs truly being met in the horse show world? And some people are going to say yes, and some are no, but I think we're going to have some very interesting answers here. So we're going to start off with Jen, and I'd like to get your opinion on this as far as, do you feel that the average rider, the average equestrian in the United States and in Canada, is that their needs are being met and their voice is being heard?
Yeah, thank you, Jay, and thank you for having me on. It's great to be here. I would say, unfortunately, no. I don't think that the average rider's voice, or the 95%'s voice, is being heard. I don't think that their needs are being met. And I think that that results in the sport or is shown in the sport in several different ways. I think that we have a lack of representation of just kind of the average, normal, everyday rider. up at the top in the governance in those arenas with the USHJ and the USEF. I don't think that the committees and the people involved in those organizations are populated by many riders who find themselves at a different space in the sport. And so I think we see a disconnect there where when those governing bodies are working on behalf of their membership, they're not necessarily aware of or working on behalf of all the different subsets within that membership. So I think that's one area that we see a disconnect. I think we also see a disconnect in what our perceptions of those riders are and who those riders are. And so if you go back to Katie Prudhon's article or her interview a few years back where she was talking about not seeing kind of the well-rounded rider in the top levels of the sport, my response to that was like, that rider does exist. I am that rider. My friends are that rider. We have so many skills, we have so much experience, but because of our financial position, you're not going to find us in the big rings at the big horse shows. We just can't afford to be there. And unfortunately, there's a perception of riders like myself, whether you call us grassroots riders or local riders, there's kind of a perception of what our skill level is or who we are that isn't necessarily indicative of what our actual experience is. And so I think that's one of the big issues that contributes to that disconnect is we tend to think of riders at the grassroots being beginning riders or foundational level riders. And those riders are absolutely necessary and vital to our sport. And we love those riders. But that pool of riders who isn't necessarily represented at the top is also made up of some very experienced and capable riders who really do want to be able to contribute to the sport in a bigger way and participate and meet their own competitive goals that right now are very much precluded just on the basis of budget and not necessarily because of talent or ability.
Yeah, that's very well said. And obviously there's a lot of talent out there and a lot of passion out there for people that unfortunately are not able to make it to Spruce Meadows or make it to Winter Equestrian Festival. Penelope, so Jen mentions, the lack of representation. Well, you're familiar with that because you applied for a seat on a board, and maybe you can just explain that briefly to our audience, please, for the USHJ, and then that was given to a show manager as opposed to you. Just tell that story, please, and what your thoughts are on that.
I think that, thanks for having me on, Jay. And Jen, I think you made some really great points. I have been in horse governance for about 15 years, and I've been on a number of different committees for USHJ. Right now I co-chair the amateur task force, and I'm on the safety task force as well, which is a great task force doing medical protocols and looking into safety, more safety of horse shows and more safety equipment. I had lobbied for a long time for an amateur seat on the board for United States Hunter Jumper Association. And finally, they decided that they would put a dedicated board seat on for an amateur. So I ran for that position, and it came down to two people. They always elect two people. I mean, they always have two people on a slate. And I lost the election to Glenn Petty, who is the current head of competition management at USHJA. And I was a little bit taken aback because I didn't consider somebody that runs 22 horse shows a year to be an amateur. But because of the loophole that he was in possession of an amateur card, he was considered an amateur, and so they could vote for him, and they did. They brought on another competition manager, and unfortunately on the board and in the organization itself, it is overloaded at this point with a lot more competition managers than people who are, in my opinion, true exhibitors, and certainly more than amateurs. So after I lost the election, I wrote an article for the Chronicle of the Horse about losing the election and about how frustrated I felt that amateurs were not being adequately represented at either USHJA or USEF. And as a result of that, that article, I had said that I would write an amateur bill of rights, which I did write, and I solicited a lot of comments from amateurs all across the board to tell me things that they felt should be in an amateur bill of rights, in things that they'd like to see change in governance. So I have done that, and I've sent it to both boards, USEF and USET, USCT and USHJA. But I think part of the problem stems from what the definition of an amateur is. It's time for the amateur rules to be rewritten. And there are a lot of people, and this goes a little bit to Jen's point, there are some people who are really struggling to be more active in the sport who could really use some economic help because the sport's gotten very expensive. And the current definition of an amateur is very limiting. And in some ways, there are things that we have restricted amateurs from doing that possibly need to have a second look for people to be able to do that, to bring in a little extra money or to not eliminate somebody from riding in the amateur divisions who, it has, let's say, I mean, even something like, teaching beginner lessons. They call them up-down lessons. I heard that a lot when I was writing the Bill of Rights. People feeling frustrated that they couldn't even teach small beginner lessons. People feeling they couldn't lunge somebody else's horse. There are things like that people could be doing that right now they're not allowed to do because of the amateur rule specifications. But the amateur rules are going to be rewritten. That is in the works, and that is one thing I can honestly say is going to happen. So I think that when we redefine what an amateur is and what you can and can't do, and we open it up a little bit more, I'm hoping that will help. The other thing that will help is there needs to be a lot more amateur representation on the committees at USHJA. I can't speak to USCF as much because I'm not involved with them on an intimate level, but there should be an amateur on competition management. There should be amateurs on all the major committees because we do have a voice. And I believe that, maybe we can't discuss the details of how to put on a horse show, but we can certainly give an exhibitor's viewpoint about topics that the competition management is talking about in a horse show. So I feel we really need to be better represented at all levels of the horse show world.
Well, I definitely want to get to what defines an amateur, but before I do that, I just want to ask Brian. Brian has a large following, and he's very connected to his people. So, Brian, do you feel there's a disconnect between your people and the USCF and USHJ and then that level, or what is your thoughts on that?
I think there's definitely a disconnect, and I think you can hear people sort of screaming at the top of their lungs. If you had to simplify what they're saying is they want affordable horse shows. That's something that I started talking about a long time ago. And I'm getting a little bit of a weird echo in my headphones.
No, you're good. Go ahead. You're good.
I'll keep talking. So they're screaming for affordable horse shows. I think that they've been feeling like they've been literally separated by income bracket in the horse show economy. And that's something that I talk about a lot is and what Penelope touched on a little bit is the over-representation of horse show managers inside the organization. And that's something that's been happening for over 100 years. The originations of USCF was 50 horse show managers getting together and creating an organization for horse show managers. And I think that DNA is still in our system, where we've seen the complete obsession with, who puts on a horse show, how many points their clients get at that horse show, where it can be put on, how big the bleachers should be, what time they should be serving hot food, all these ridiculous things that don't even need to be specified, and so many things within the organization that are completely ignored. So you can see it's got a little bit of a history of, being for horse show managers by horse show managers. And I think what Penelope is talking about and what everyone here is talking about is creating some policies that speak more to the riders, more to the members, more to just the everyday person who is basically just looking for a unified, affordable horse show environment.
Right. No, and a lot of people want that. And then the question is it possible to provide that service, in today's economy? And that's where the balance comes in. Can you run a horse show that's quality and safe and affordable all at the same time? And
I think you can.
Yes,
I think you can, Jay.
Go ahead.
I think that what you're going to see, especially after COVID, more people are staying home and want quality shows that are local to their area. They don't want to have to go to Michigan. They don't want to have to go even 3 hours away. they'd like to have more opportunity to show closer to home. And I certainly did that this winter. I didn't go away. I'm not in Florida. And I think that you're going to see much more interest in B and C shows and the rise of smaller A shows. People want a competitive product. And I did some horse shows this fall that were A shows, but they were small A shows and local shows. And they were very well put on. I think you can have a very quality product that is not, not a premier horse show. And I think that you're going to see the demand for that grow now that more people are used to staying home. They're going to want to have a product that's close to home, that's safe, that's less expensive. And I think that, that's something that horse show managers can put on if they want to put on. And if they feel that they have a reason and built an audience to do that, then I think they will.
Yeah, no, that's well said. So Jen, let me ask a final question on this topic with these horse shows. Do you think it'd be nice to see like a circuit of these shows that is either statewide or nationwide? I know like in Ontario, Canada, they have what's called the Trillium Circuit, which is immensely popular and when well attended. That is exactly that. Would you like to see some of that, or do you think it falls upon kind of small, private, local show managers to put together, these events, say, as individually as opposed to more of a network? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's absolutely a needed product. I think that riders such as myself and the riders who I speak for, I think what we're looking for is a competitive home that matches our budget and that is affordable, that is quality, but that gives us a space to compete for year-end awards and do all the things that we see other people being able to do at the elite levels and have that home. I think the question of where does it come from, I think that's still to be defined. I think there's a great opportunity there, and whether that's something that is met nationally by the USEF and the USHJA, I would love to see that. I think they have great infrastructure in place and a great ability to provide a lot of things that are necessary in providing a safe and quality competition. However, whether or not they're going to be able to step up and provide that, I think remains to be seen. And so I think one of the things that I'm passionate about is the idea that we can't keep waiting for changes to be handed to us by everyone else. So at some point, if people like myself want to see changes enacted, we can certainly hope that they come from the top and try to do things to communicate that to the top. But I think we also do have to at some point get involved in creating solutions for ourselves. So I do think that there is that market. I think where it comes from is definitely still to be determined. But one of the things that I hear a lot from people who communicate with me is they want a place where they want their competition skills to be validated and celebrated. They want to be able to have the goals that the top riders have. They want to be able to have things that they're working for, regional championships, or an indoor circuit that you don't have to qualify with 40, 50 horse shows a year. Things that are within reach of the average person's financial means, that still gives them the ability to participate, the ability to be competitive. And I think that that's needed. I think a lot of us are really tired of being told to settle. A lot of us are really tired of being told to be like, well, you have local shows, or, well, you have this, or, well, you should just be thankful that you get to ride, because there's a lot of people who can't afford a horse. Like, I get told that a lot. And I am blessed that I do get to compete a little bit, and I do have horses where a lot of people don't. But I also don't think it's wrong to want to stretch and have competitive goals and have a competitive home that also fits our budget. And I think if you look at a lot of other sports, they have a lot of different options for people. They have different levels of competition, or like if you look at football, even within college sports, there's Division I, Division II, Division III that kind of fit in with those athletes' different particular skill sets or talent levels. And I think that's something that we're definitely lacking in this world.
Jen, don't you think that part of that responsibility falls on your zone?
Yeah, I do. I do agree with that. I think that the zone should have a little bit more responsibility with that, for sure.
Because I think that I'm not active in my zone. I'm zone 2. Mm-hmm. So I'm not on the zone 2 board. But it seems to me that what you're describing, really, that should be part of the zone's initiative to really promote shows for its members, to have year-end awards for its members, and things for them to aim for. So that to me is really, I think the zones, maybe they need to step up more. I don't know all that much about them, but
yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things that I find to be the biggest challenge, I've done a lot of research and a lot of work on this issue over the past few years. And I started an organization called the Riders Coalition that we've really tried to dig in and find what's the issue, or can we narrow this down a little bit? One of the things that we feel exists is there's kind of a gap right now that exists. We have the local circuits that are 100% valuable and wonderful. I've spent so much time there. They serve a very specific subset of the market with more of the beginning riders, or riders who are showing up into a certain point, usually about the 3 foot to 3'6" mark. And then we have the A shows that start up and serve the people who can ride at that level, who can afford to ride at that level. What we end up with is a gap in the middle of very talented and capable riders who have outgrown the local circuits, but who also can't afford to participate on most of the A show circuits. And
that's why you really, so you need to have the rise and the support of the C and B shows.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is one of my pet peeves, and why I feel the mileage rule is very detrimental in a lot of ways, because I think that there's a huge need for more shows at the C and B level that are really outstanding shows. I think that's where the demand really is. There's a lot.
I think we need to really take a look, though. I don't think people have really taken a hard enough look at what the criteria is for A, B, and C shows, and why we've decided to even have different categories of shows. I'm a huge advocate for having one horse show license. So we don't need to have A, B, C shows and call them different things and give their competitors different points. Now, it is true that wealthier riders will want to go to nicer shows, and less, wealthy riders will want to spend their money on less expensive shows. But I don't think they need to be different horse show licenses. And the way that we've created different licenses, if I share my screen, let me see if I can share it. It's a little bit crazy, because you get a better horse show license if your horse show has bigger arenas, bigger bleachers, serves hot food. Basically, if the facility is nicer, we give our riders more points.
But it's done on money. It's done on money.
It's done a little bit on. There's some prize money, but it's like if I ride it at the 3 foot level, and the Grand Prix at that particular horse show is offering $25,000, then and there's 3 people in my class, but I'm at a horse show where the best riders are competing for $50,000, then I get 25 points in my 3 foot class at that show. Now, meanwhile, there's a horse show with our less expensive, facility. There's no prize money there, but there's 50 people in the 3 foot division there. That person that won against 30 riders is going to only get 10 points for their performance, versus the really, really wealthy kid who happened to be at a show that just had better amenities and more prize money for other riders gets 25 points. And that's exactly what people are screaming about. Like, you're just giving rich kids more points for less performance, really.
Well, I don't know that I completely agree with you about everything you said, but Premier, National, Premier's the top, then it goes National, which would be a regular A, and then you go B, C, and unrated and unrecognized for local. And the points are done on the rating of the horse show, and the rating of the horse show is done on the amount of prize money that they give out. So I suppose you could make a case that, at an A show, kids are going to, or adults, or amateurs, or anyone in the hunter division. This is not a jumper thing. This is totally, we're talking hunters now. You are going to get more points if it's an A show versus a B show, but you get more points for the amount of people that are in it. So I mean, if you have 20 people at a single A and you have less people at what was a double A that's now a premier, you're still going to get almost as many points, maybe more. Also, in some of the divisions you're talking about, like the adults, there is not one big show that I have been to in a very long time that doesn't have 1 million adults. That's like one of the biggest horse show. That's one of the biggest divisions at the show.
So we need to move on to the next topic here, but I do want to say I had a very interesting conversation last week with a friend of mine in Oregon, and he's looking at running some horse shows and that sort of thing at a very, it's a very exciting level, but he made some great points about how it could be done where everybody is at the show together, how at the same horse show you can cater to the 2'6" rider, who can only go to 3 shows a year. You can also compete to the international level rider, and you can do it all at the same venue, and you could all do it.
It's called Germany, and you'll see the equivalent. Yeah, you'll see like the biggest superstars in the sport showing up to the most local shows too. It's the same license. So we're already doing that. We don't need to physically separate our riders by income bracket and give the wealthier ones more points when there's no skill-based filter to go to an A show. It's only financially based.
Yeah.
I really don't think you have a good. I don't think you have a good point there, because I honestly I do a lot of showing, and I don't see what you're saying about the points are different or the skill level is different. I don't understand quite what your point is, because I think all those shows in the adults from C, B, Premier, the adults are really a competitive division, and those riders are really good at whatever show they're at. That's why I don't really know if I agree with what you're saying.
I think that, as I understand it, what Brian's saying is that, yes, they are competitive and they are skilled and they are good. And so then the people that are at the C show could be being rewarded the same points wise as the people that are at the A show. And that, I believe that's what I'm hearing. And it's true, they shouldn't be, because you don't have as much money to spend on the horse show, you shouldn't be discriminated against from what you earn. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, if you go through the rule book and you look at the 100 division increment chart, if you get a first place at a C show, you get 10 points. If you get a first place at a B show, you get 15 points. If you get first place at an A show, you get 20. Double A, you get 25 points. And if you look at in France, they separate their riders by skill. So if you want to go to an A show in France, you have to be a level 7 rider, which means your show record and so that at least makes sense. So the only riders that are going to go to these A shows are good riders. But in the US, if you want to go to a double A show and get 25 points for first place, there's no merit-based filter stopping you from going. It's just going to be really expensive.
Right.
So
no question. That's
where I'm saying people are like, well, when you're ready to go to a double A show and you really get good, I'm like, when you're ready is when your dad gets a raise or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like they start at the crossrails and it's just really expensive. There's no merit-based thing. And so you're right, Jay. We don't need to separate everybody into A, B, C. We can all be at the same event. We could at least all be at the same circuit. We could all be in the same circuit like they are in Germany.
So let's. I want to continue this, but I want to just kind of move on to a little bit to the next part as well. So let's go back to Jen. Affordability of the sport. That's you brought that up, and it's obviously a big one. I mean, my daughter rides, and I'm just like, God, I'd love her to to go to every single show and do all that. Of course, it's not an option, and it wasn't an option for myself growing up either. And I rode on the international level and on the Nations Cup level, and we couldn't go to all the horse shows. That wasn't an option. So, but it has become more of a gap, no question, and it's become more of a gap. That's not necessary. Secluded to the horse world, that's society in general. So solutions to that. So you say, we'd like to be able to show, but we want to have it where it's affordable. So there's got to be some things then that cut back, and whether that with say judging, whether that be with, I'm not going to say prizes because they don't give good prizes anymore anywhere. But maybe it's where prize money, or is it with footing, or was it with the quality of the course designer, or what's okay and what's not okay as far as being able to make it affordable, Jen?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's a complicated question, because I think one of the things that has changed, if you look at shows from 30 or 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago, from when I was a kid showing, you had A shows at facilities that were not necessarily on par with Wellington or Ocala, or the modern show facility that's supposed to have some very specific amenities and have very specific footing. I remember back in St. Louis, we had the Bridal Spur Charity Horse Show, which was out at the old Bridal Spur Hunt Club, and it was one of my favorite horse shows, but it was not a fancy facility. It was one of our favorites just because of the culture surrounding that horse show, but it certainly wasn't, it didn't have fiber footing, and it didn't have hot food served and VIP tents and all of that. So I think one of the questions we do have to ask ourselves as exhibitors is, are we willing to sacrifice any of those amenities? Are we okay with going back to showing in some of the more simple showing facilities that perhaps we grew up in or we look at from prior years? And at the same time, what improvements have we made because we understand them to be that important? Is there a certain standard of footing that we do need? To Brian's point, as you look through what a lot of the show standards requirements are, as you work through those levels of competition, there are a lot of things in there that don't pertain to the quality of, say, the footing. Like, there's those elements for sure, but then there's a lot of things like having a jumbotron or having bleachers and stuff that really don't pertain to it. And so I think that is part of the question. I think that we all need to ask that question, and as a sport, we need to ask that question of simple facilities. There's, I'm in Colorado now. I grew up in St. Louis, but there's an open saddle club show in a town called Greeley that I took my mare to when I moved here. And it's a very simple facility. Everybody hauls in and shows off their trailer all day, which is super fun. Everybody's super nice. It's a nice, really big arena, good footing. It's just like a dirt sand footing, so nothing fancy, but very good footing, a nice, good warm-up arena. And the classes cost $5 a class. And so I got out of there for showing in kind of the English classes just to get some mileage on my mare for $32 for a day of showing. Every class came with a trophy and a ribbon, and it was fun, and you could work towards year-end awards within that saddle club's organization. And, you sit there and you look at that and you say, okay, that didn't have jumps, so that's an expense there that was different, but they can put on a horse show for $32 for me. And you don't see anything that comes in anywhere close within the hunter jumper organization that can touch that price point. So I think one thing that we do need to do is look at the other disciplines. What are the saddle club shows doing? What are, say, the quarter horse facility or the quarter horse organization for their young participants? I think for the juniors, they have a cap on entries where I don't know if it's like $200 or $250 for some of their horse shows. That's all the junior exhibitor pays, and that covers all of their costs, all of the classes. I think we can look at rodeo and look at how the rodeo disciplines have done things and the amazing prize money that they can still bring in a very affordable way, which is incredible. My niece rodeos, and she routinely comes home every weekend with $250 and a free rodeo from the money that she earns. So I think that is also part of the solution, is starting to look outside of our own really narrow discipline and see what are everybody else doing, because they're making it work in a way that somehow we can't figure out.
Yeah, so I do want to say that to run the big horse shows, it's expensive. I mean, there's no question. It costs a lot of money to run a horse show. I mean, the amount of staff, the amount of work that goes into it. But at the same time, then when you hear a story like that, and and at $32, that doesn't pay your office fee at a show. So Penelope,
I think, but it's a simple thing, Jay, where I think that there is so much USEF required overhead at the AA shows that just needs to be cut away, and you need to have just the required overhead of a horse show dropped way to planet Earth, and just have one simple standard that all horse shows need to obey. Now, if a manager wanted to go way above and beyond that, like what you see at WEF or the World Equestrian Center, that is totally fine to cater to that market. But we're not going to give their competitors more points, more glory towards awards simply because their facility is nicer. We're going to base your glory and the awards and the points that we give you based on the quality of riders that are at a show and the number of riders that are at a show, not on the quality of the Jumbotron, the footing, and the amount of prize money that's available, because that just gets passed on to the competitor.
So yes, no, that's well said too. So Penelope, let me ask you, and I'm sure you've done this too. I mean, if we go back a few years, we used to put up a row of flags around a grass field and throw some jumps in that grass field, and we go jump around, and we just had the best days of our lives. If you could do that today, it would make it a lot easier than spending $300,000 on a fiber footing arena. But what would you think, like in your area, if that was the case? Someone went to a nice big grass field and soccer fields and whatever, and put up flags and threw some jumps out there. What is today's consumer gonna do with that?
I think it depends on the consumer, because when you were saying that, I was thinking about there's 2 or 3 fox hunts in this area, and they have little fox hunt shows, and they have little events that they do, and they're not high-end type of events. They're not going in great footing or anything like that. That's probably the closest to what I did as a kid, where we rode around in fields and it wasn't really safe, and we did things that, like curl my hair now if I think about them. I can't believe I did them. Yeah. But so I think that it really depends on how you do it. Mm-hmm. I think you can do a local show that's not recognized but put on very well by people who are knowledgeable. I think that there is a really important role for some of the nonprofit shows, because the nonprofit shows, which I think are some of the best shows out there, by the way, not put on by a manager that's doing 10, 12 horse shows a year, you have a lot of volunteers. I mean, Blowing Rock is a beautiful show in North Carolina. And there are other shows like Blowing Rock, and they're nonprofit horse shows, and they have a lot of people that are working for the organization that do a lot of work for free, which brings down the cost of the show. I'm not saying that's an inexpensive show, but I'm saying if you use as a model that you want to have a local show that's well run, you can probably minimize the expenses by having some of the people do some of the work. And by not having some of the amenities, like, okay, maybe you have a food truck that comes in, but you don't have a fancy tent. There are ways to do it if you want to do it. I think it's possible.
I think that's what's important, is finding a modern solution that kind of bridges that gap and fits those needs. It's what are those amenities that are super expensive that we don't need, that don't provide any value and don't go towards safety? Or can we find a facility that has very good, very safe footing that isn't necessarily, a fiber footing? Or how can we find ways to put on a show in a less expensive way? Because like you said, Jay, if you really look at all the costs involved in putting on a horse show, like they are many, and it is expensive, but I do think that some of it doesn't have to be as expensive as it is. And I think if we start looking a little bit creatively, incorporating volunteers, I think that there is a way to bring that cost down.
But it's so easy. Like what you're hearing from Penelope is what we've been brainwashed as a horse show culture, is to immediately do everything we can to diminish the accomplishment of riders at inexpensive facilities, when we should be doing the opposite. So what I mean by that is, if I rope off a field and I have a horse show there and I just barely meet the horse show requirements by a minimum standard, we should give my riders the same exact credit towards all these awards that we make as a bigger facility. And if we did that, you would see riders come out of the woodwork for these types of shows, because what we immediately do is what you heard Penelope say is, well, yeah, if we rope off a field and do it, sure, we'll call it unrecognized. We won't recognize the accomplishment of anyone that does anything good at that event, because it just, it'll be nonprofit and it'll be cute. But what I'm saying is, you can rope off a field, have a Grand Prix out there, and the winner of that Grand Prix should get more respect than the winner of a Grand Prix out on the Grand Prix field at the World Equestrian Center, because it's harder to ride at these crappy facilities.
So I don't think you're going to have any top Grand Prix riders bringing their, $600,000 to $1 million to $2 million horses to ride in a field that doesn't have good footing. That's not going to happen.
Happens all day, every day in Germany. You'll see people get their
in Germany. This is
40 horses off the trailer and jump around. I know
Europe's a great venue, and I hear all the time about how wonderful Europe is. And I can honestly say, I haven't been there, so I can't do that as a comparison. And I don't do the jumpers, so I'm really more of a hunter expert than a jumper expert. But I do think there is nothing that says that you have to compete at a USCF recognized show. There are a lot of other shows. If you want the recognition from a USEF organization, if you want that kind of recognition, and it's the USEF that fields those teams, the Olympic teams and all the other stuff, then you're going to have to do those shows that are recognized by them. And they're not
pay $2,500 a week.
Yeah. I don't see any other way around it. I really don't. And all the people from Europe, because Europe's closed down right now, are at WEF.
It is difficult. We had Rodrigo Pessoa on the show, and he's a great ambassador to the sport, and obviously very knowledgeable and been everywhere. And his thoughts are often like, well, they do this in Europe and then Europe, and it's true. Honestly, they do it way better in Europe. There's no question.
Just model Europe. It's not that different, guys. You can pretty much model anything in Europe and here. They're not too different. It's not like a third world country and a first world country. We can model pretty much any product, any experience of Europe. Everyone that says, well, we can't do it. It's like, we could. It's not that different.
It is possible. And there are people such as, say, Ali Nilfarishan, who runs Nilfarishan Equisports, that runs a European model and stuff. So it is possible. It is a challenging from a societal point of view to make happen. I wish it would happen. I do think that first world, third world thing, actually, when it comes to show jumping, we're in the third world compared to what they're doing over there.
We're the only country that, we just made up this obsession with the horse show manager in this country has just led to a whole bunch of weird rules that are easily eliminated, and then we just get back to Europe. One simple horse show standard, and if you want to go above and beyond that, that's your prerogative. But in Europe, we basically have that in the NSBA. Like, NSBA is basically Europe.
So we do have a question from one of our listeners, and thank you so much for watching the show. We really appreciate it, and we love feedback. So here's from Kelly Hannigan. To the panel, has it ever been thought that pricing for such as stalls, classes, and even possibly prize money be regulated, possibly by rating, such that if you go to a show here in Florida, in Palm Beach, the price is the same as it would be in Ocala or even Tampa? What I don't like is that I can go to the same facility one week and the stall is $250, and then another week and it is $450, and it is the same stall. And I've heard this a lot.
Oh, yeah.
It happens all the time. Let's go back to Jen. Address that question from Kelly, please.
Well, Kelly, I can say I share that same observation and that same frustration, especially when you take that same stall and you look at it at a dressage show or at a Western show at the same facility. Then you go from that $450 to $250 to maybe $100 to maybe $50. So there is kind of a fascinating thing when you look at a stall and you think it should be one certain price, and it feels like, I'm not a show manager, so I don't know, but as a consumer, it feels like that show manager is just trying to stick it to us and charge us a lot of money for the same stall. Why it is that way, if there's particular overhead costs that they're building into that stall fee for the bigger shows, I don't know. I personally would love to see some sort of standardization of those stall fees to make it more affordable. I don't know if that's something that the governing bodies are going to be able to do. So practically speaking, I don't know how that would work. It is a question that I brought up actually when I was on the USEF grassroots task force. And the reaction from that board, at least, was that was something that they couldn't necessarily regulate, that was really up to show managers. But yeah, I know at the facility in St. Louis, you would see Western shows have a stall for $45 or $50, and the English or 100 jumper shows will be $250 and $300 for a week for the same stall. So it is a mystery, and one that I think would help, at least if we could understand why there is that pricing gap.
Yes, absolutely. So I do want to get to Penelope and her amateur bill of rights. I want to get to, before we run out of time here today, and what defines an amateur, because I know, Penelope, you have some strong thoughts on this, and I know Brian has a very interesting viewpoint on this. And so I want to get to that. So Penelope, you wrote an amateur bill of rights. You put it up on Facebook. It's been sent into the Chronicle. You did this for the USHJ and then essentially for USEF. So if you could just touch on a couple points with that, please, what the thought process is behind the amateur bill of rights and what you would like to see happen. If you could, in the next few minutes, just tell us all this work you put into it and what you're doing.
I think that the work I put into it really was an attempt to get amateurs to vocalize what it is they want most from their horse experience in terms of what we could get from USCF and USHJA. So it talks about price and the money that it costs to go to shows and why it should be less, or how can we make it less. It talks about having more representation on the board of the major organizations to have a voice when decisions are made, particularly decisions that will affect amateurs. So it really was a combination of a lot of feedback that I had from amateurs about things in the sport that upset them. And a lot of it comes back to what the definition of an amateur is and how that's changing now from what it was 20 years ago. It's very different. People's socioeconomic situation has changed. And I think there's more interest now in making it a little broader definition than it was in the past, which would go back to talking about having things like maybe being able to do lower level kinds of lessons. Maybe somebody had used an example of someone, this was a young person. And this also, I think, is something that's very important to remember, that for the sport to grow, it has to grow from the youth on up. So when you look at adult riding or adult people and the amateurs, adult amateurs, you're talking about juniors that are coming out of a very different system than what amateurs have. As a junior, you can be paid, you can do all kinds of things. Then all of a sudden you become 18 and you go into the amateurs and it's very restrictive. And there are some people who are fortunate and their parents can pay to continue their riding career. There are other people who are emerging pros possibly. They haven't made a decision about whether they want to do that yet. And they would like to have the opportunity to work for a trainer or to do some things in the barn or maybe teach some low-level lessons. And they don't have that opportunity. If they do that, then they have to become a professional right away, and they may not be ready to do that. So I think that it comes back to, somebody had used an example, which I thought was an interesting one, of a young person who's like 20 or 21 and not a particularly good rider, and had started a little business for herself where, and this was actually in Florida, but she went to somebody's house if they couldn't ride that day and groomed their horse and rode their horse and left them nicely in case you had to work or do something. She cannot be an amateur because she's riding someone else's horse, but she's not competing someone else's horse. You know, she's basically just providing a service. So there are people when you talk about that 95%, I think there are some amateurs out there who would like to have the freedom to do different kinds of things and be able to earn a little bit more money and have a little bit more respect and have more opportunities at lower, I don't want to say lower level shows, but maybe at more C and B shows. I think those are the people that need the representation. And that's really what the Amateur Bill of Rights was supposed to do. It was supposed to bring to both the USCF and USHJA, it was supposed to bring attention to this group of people that needs more help, that needs some legislation, that needs to have the rules rewritten, that wants more opportunities in the sport. And that's why I wrote it. And, you know, that's pretty much it, you know, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback, not because I think it's the greatest thing ever, but because there is so much consternation out there. Mm-hmm. Should amateurs be allowed to have judges' cards? That's a huge issue. And going forward, when we rewrite the rules, that's going to be one of the most contentious issues, as is the social media influencers.
I'm going to get to Brian here in a moment, but just a quick question for you, Penelope. Is it safe to say you would like to see more opportunities and more amateurs and less people defined as professionals?
You know, I don't think it's less people defined as professionals. I think that we need to have a broader look at what an amateur is today. I think that when the rules are rewritten, and I did write a draft for one possible way that they could be rewritten, I think that you have to solicit opinions from all through the sport, from juniors, from emerging athletes, from collegiate. I think you have to look at everybody that's a stakeholder in the amateur and the adult world and see what it is they really need and they want. And that's going to take some research. And that's how we're going to redefine what an amateur is today, by asking them, what do you think an amateur should be today? Does it bother you that some amateurs can judge and have judges' cards? I couldn't believe the amount of traffic on that line, on that thread when Bill Rue posted it. It's probably the most contentious line I've seen in a long time because people have so many thoughts about it. So
Brian, what are your thoughts about that?
So I think that it really speaks to what we talked about in the very beginning, is that as an organization, we've put so much thought into how we separate and classify our horse shows, which we really don't need to put that much thought into. We just have one. And we've put in very, very, very little thought into how we separate our riders in the sport. And we've separated them in the most problematic, really stupid way you possibly could, where we only have 2 competition pools, right? Where if you get paid $1 for letting some kid ride your horse, you get put in the same category as BZ Madden. Whereas if you don't make any money, you get put in another category. And obviously that's ridiculously problematic because, giving lessons doesn't necessarily make you more competitive as a rider. Actually taking lessons does. So you have some people that are independently wealthy who have never, I guess, made money. They're technically amateurs. And you have people who are, not competitive whatsoever, but technically professionals. So the other really problematic thing about using how we generate money as a way to separate our skill, not only is it not correlate, meaning, if I generate money because CWD gave me a saddle, that doesn't mean I'm a good rider. So it doesn't correlate. So it's not a good method for separating us into different competition pools. It's also impossible, and it's really overstepping for USEF to ask for that information from us as members. And so to really enforce all these rules based on how we make money, they're going to want to see our bank statements. They're going to want to see our tax returns. They're going to want to interview everyone close to you. And all that is expensive. So you have to raise our fees.
Well, they can't do that. I mean, legally, they can't do that. I mean, one of the problems with the amateur rules, Brian, has been that it's very hard to enforce a lot of them.
Yeah, it's
because you can't do that. I mean, it's very hard to prove that somebody doesn't own a horse, even if you've heard via the grapevine that they don't, and they're showing in an amateur owner division.
Right. So don't create an unenforceable rule is my suggestion to USEF, USHJA, as you're rewriting all this. So what is 100%? We could lower our fees tomorrow if we move to a model where we analyze our horse show records and separate us into different competitor pools based on our skills. It's kind of funny. If you
who's going to make the skill valuation? I mean, that sounds rather subjective to me. I mean, who's to say that you're in skill level A or skill level B? What are you basing that on?
You would have to do that based on, again, what the German model, where it's based on victories, essentially.
It's based on your record. Yeah, it's based on your horse show record.
It is a radical thought, and I don't know if it's feasible or not, but they do
it makes too much sense for anyone to in the horse show world to ever.
But first of all, in Europe, they don't have you're really, that's really something for the jumpers. That's not something that I think you can apply to the hunters. And they don't even.
It's for placings. You place in the hunter ring just the way you place in the jumper ring.
No, it is not at all like the jumper ring. They're two completely separate disciplines.
And I agree, actually, I do agree with Penelope on that. And I want you to share, Brian, your baseball analogy for the audience, because I love your Little League baseball analogy. So I want you to share that, please. But I do think that Brian's idea would not work in the hunter world. It could from a fact point of view, from a theoretical point of view, but from a practical point of view, I don't think it could work thinking it through. But in the jumper world, it definitely could work. But Brian, share your baseball analogy with us, because I really think that one hits home.
So, there's a huge population of dads and moms that play recreational style baseball, let's just say on Friday night. And as athletes, we all want to be in a competition pool that's about the same level of skill. I don't want to be playing against somebody that's ridiculously better than me, or be playing a bunch of people that are way, way worse. So let's just say this dad has found a great rec league on Friday nights. He loves playing baseball with his buddies. It's the perfect level of competitiveness. And then let's just say, like every dad does, he wants to coach his kid's baseball team. And obviously you get a bunch of sponsors that get behind you, and they usually buy him a gift at the end of the year. And he teaches a bunch of 5-year-olds how to play baseball. Now, if we applied the same horse show type logic to baseball, then what we would do is we would treat this man like a criminal. We would, haul him into like a kangaroo baseball court, and interview all of the kids on his team and find out that, yeah, they actually bought him a gift over a certain amount, and he did accept sponsors. They gave him a bat, and we would make him out to be a criminal, we would fine him money. And at the end of the day, we'd say, hey, you know, from now on, you are only playing baseball against professional baseball players. You better be able to hit a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, because your world is about to change, and you no longer can play with your friends at that level that was perfect for you. So it's such a deterrent, because everyone around him is like, oh my God, I will never coach a little league team again. You know, like, that's such a huge penalty. And I think that's what we're at least all agreeing on here, is that we've really penalized people from starting these beginner programs, helping beginners, charging money for beginners, because it puts us into this dramatically more competitive pool. It's a punishment. And then on the other hand, USEF is saying our number one goal is to increase like participation, but we've penalized like people from basically just helping, you know, total beginners.
Yeah, no question. So this is, you know, this is a complicated topic and I'm hoping we're bringing some relevant issues to the table here and hoping we get some solutions to it. That's obviously the goal. And you guys are making some great points, and I love it. So I want to finish up with one thought from each of you, and that is, what if there's one thing that you could change about the horse industry, realistically, what would that one thing be? And whether that be, from a horse show point of view or whatever is something we talked about. So let's go and start with Jen here. Jen, if you could, snap your fingers and say, this is the one thing I'd really like to see change in the horse show world or in the equestrian world in the United States and Canada, what would that be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of different ways I could answer it, so it's hard to pick one thing, but I think if I look at one thing that would make a big difference, it would just be to see better pathways for success in the sport that aren't primarily based on your budget. So I would love to be able to see, even like I referenced in my first article, responding to Katie, for young riders who are limited by budget, for them to still have pathways to advance themselves in the sport and to achieve their competitive goals, find their way onto national teams, do big things based on their talent, and not have that just be based on their pocketbook and have their ability constrained by their financial resources. So I think we could do one big thing that would affect a lot of people in a lot of different ways. It would be to have better pathways for advancement in the sport that aren't just based on financial means.
Well, thank you. That's really well said and brilliant. I absolutely love that. Brian, you're next, please. Go ahead.
That's a great question. I think my first proposal would just be to really eliminate a lot of things. I think that we've added too many things, especially with the obsession of the hunter jumper horse show manager in the realm of, horse sports in general. I think there's just a huge, it's taken up way too much of our time and energy and resources. So I would eliminate the mileage rule. I would eliminate all the different licenses and classifications that horse show events go to. And I think that would open up space for us to start looking at the riders, the rider levels, and all these other things. I think sometimes you have to make room for something by, eliminating something else.
Okay, great. So simplify. You're looking for a simpler, more black and white process.
I would free up some. There's entire floors of USEF, and all they do is just regulate horse show managers, hunter jumper horse show managers. So I think if we simplified that, we would at least get some time back and some resources back to start creating some programs, that would be serving the riders.
Right. Penelope, you've got the magic wand and you're able to fix something by snapping your fingers. What's it going to be?
I would like to see horses be less expensive. Mm-hmm. I think the cost of horses has risen so much, astronomically so. I would like to see the cost of horses come down so that anybody who would like to have a horse has more choice and can find a safe and wonderful horse without having to worry about so many commissions being tacked on. And I really think I want something. I mean, I love your two answers. I love Brian's and Jen's answers, but mine's more basic. I'd like to see horses be more affordable as animals.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem in the sport, no question about it. And yeah, well said. You guys, thank you so much for your time. You've been wonderful guests. This was an amazing roundtable. I think it's a very important topic, and definitely one that we're going to keep on and keep working on, because everyone's heart is in the right place. I think everyone wants essentially the same thing, and it's been just fantastic to have the three of you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate everybody on here, and Jen and Penelope and Jay, thank you guys so much for having this roundtable. It was really interesting to
Good discussions.
hear you guys.
Yeah.
Great discussion. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to also thank Horse Network for making this all happen, and Carly Sparks for producing everything. I want to thank EquiVault, which is your best resource for online lessons. Check them out. Everything you want to learn is all right there in the library. Lessons start at $8 a lesson. And here's an example. It shows you, a map of your arena. It gives you the materials you need. It tells you what it works on for the horse. It tells you what it works on for the rider. It gives you it's a blueprint for teaching lessons. So everyone's been sitting in their tack room and you're like, oh geez, I got a lesson in 5 minutes. What am I going to do? This here is the world's greatest library of lessons that is out there. So please check them out. Next week, Anderson Lima is coming on the show. Top FBI course designer, just a fantastic individual, a great ambassador to the sport. Really excited to have a discussion with him. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things, the challenges of being a course designer and how that works. I can't wait to get Anderson's opinions on things. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. As always, ride safely and respect the horse.